My name is Miranda Hawkins, and 7 days ago my own father looked at me lying in a hospital bed with 14 stitches across my scalp, crossed his own name off my emergency contact form, and said 5 words I'll never forget. You're not my daughter anymore. He didn't say that because I committed a crime. He said it because his wife convinced him I'd pushed my 14-year-old half-brother off a ladder. I didn't push him. I actually saved his life. But the only person bleeding that day was me, and somehow I still became the villain. I didn't beg him to stay. I didn't chase him down the hallway. I simply watched them leave. What none of them realized was that, just a few hours earlier, I'd seen something sitting on the kitchen counter, a small business card with a real estate company's logo on it. At the time, it meant nothing. 7 days later, it became the one thing that destroyed every lie they built against me. Before I tell you about the hospital, before I tell you about the accusation, you need to understand the house. Because none of this really started with the ladder. It started with a promise I made when I was 12 years old. The house stood on a quiet corner lot in Springfield, Ohio, about 45 miles from my apartment in Columbus. To everyone else, it was just another 2-story family home. To me, it was the last place where my mother still felt alive. My mother, Ellen, spent 22 years working as a librarian. She loved books more than television, flowers more than jewelry, and rainy afternoons more than vacations. The front room had a little reading nook where she'd spend hours organizing novels in ways only she understood. While she read, I'd sit on the floor beside her doing homework, believing nothing in the world could ever separate us. Then, cancer did. She passed away when I was 12. A few hours before she died, she squeezed my hand with what little strength she had left and whispered one request. Keep the house. Keep this family together. At 12 years old, I promised her I would. Children make promises without understanding how expensive they'll become. I spent the next 18 years paying for that promise. When the furnace died in the middle of winter, I paid to replace it. When the roof started leaking, I paid half the repair bill. When property taxes came due and Dad couldn't cover them, I quietly transferred the money without telling anyone. I never asked to be thanked. I never expected praise. Every payment felt like another brick keeping my mother's memory standing. As long as that house existed, I believed some part of her still had an address. 3 years after my mother died, my father remarried. Her name was Denise. The very first Thanksgiving after she moved in, she sat in my mother's chair at the head of the table. I remember staring at that chair the entire dinner. Every instinct inside me wanted to say something, but I looked at my father instead. He looked happy. So I stayed silent. That became my role in the family. Whenever speaking up threatened someone else's comfort, I stayed silent. Whenever sacrificing something made everyone else's life easier, I volunteered. Over time, silence became my second language. A year later, my little half-brother Cole was born. None of what happened later was ever his fault. I loved that kid from the day he came home from the hospital. I taught him how to ride a bicycle. I helped with homework. I picked him up after practice when Dad forgot. Whenever he climbed trees, fences, or playground equipment that was much too high for him, I'd automatically reach out a hand beneath him. One afternoon he laughed and said, "You always catch me." I smiled because it was true. I always did. I just never imagined one day saving him would cost me my own family. As the years passed, I quietly became the person everyone depended on. If Dad's truck broke down, he called me. If Cole got sick in the middle of the night, Denise called me. If bills needed paying, I paid them. If birthdays were forgotten, I remembered them. Somewhere along the way I stopped being Miranda. I became the family problem solver. The reliable one. The responsible one. The daughter who never complained. What I didn't realize was that people can slowly stop loving who you are and start loving only what you do for them. That difference changes everything. I just didn't know it yet. A week before everything fell apart, I walked into my father's kitchen early one morning. Denise didn't know I was awake. She was standing by the counter talking quietly on the phone. I only caught one sentence before she noticed movement. "Once Miranda signs the papers, we can move fast." Right beside her coffee mug sat a business card. It belonged to a local real estate agency. I picked it up for just a second. Before I could read the entire name, a bedroom door opened upstairs. I quickly placed the card back exactly where I'd found it. When I asked my father about it later that afternoon, he wouldn't look me in the eyes. Denise answered instead. "This house has been holding you back, Miranda." She smiled while she said it. At the time, I honestly believed she meant my grief. I had no idea. She was talking about something else entirely. And by the following Saturday morning, that little business card would become the most important piece of evidence in my entire life. I thought we were spending that Saturday cleaning out old boxes in my mother's attic. I had no idea the house had already been secretly listed for sale. And 6 seconds later, one broken ladder would give Denise exactly the weapon she'd been waiting 15 years to use against me. 6 seconds. That's all it took. 6 seconds for a broken attic ladder to destroy my family, cost me my father's love, and turn me from the woman who saved a child into the woman everyone believed had tried to hurt him. But here's the part no one knew. By the time that ladder broke, the plan to sell my mother's house had already been in motion for weeks. The Saturday of the move felt strange from the moment I pulled into the driveway. Normally the house looked lived in. There were flower pots near the porch, shoes by the front door, refrigerator magnets collected over 20 years, and little reminders that real people actually called it home. That morning, almost everything was gone. The living room looked empty. The dining room echoed when you spoke. Boxes were stacked against the walls. The reading nook where my mother used to spend every evening with a novel had been stripped clean. Even the family pictures were missing. It didn't feel like we were organizing memories. It felt like someone had already erased them. Jen swayed in the doorway for a moment, trying to ignore the uncomfortable feeling growing in my stomach. Dad was sealing cardboard boxes with packing tape. Denise walked from room to room taking pictures with her phone. Not family pictures, pictures of empty rooms, every angle, every hallway, every bedroom. I finally asked, "Why are you photographing everything?" She smiled without stopping. "Insurance records." It sounded reasonable, but something about the way she answered felt rehearsed, like she'd already expected someone to ask. A few minutes later I found one of my mother's storage boxes sitting near the hallway. Her handwriting was still visible across the side. Seeing those faded blue letters stopped me in my tracks. I knelt beside it and slowly lifted the lid. Inside were pieces of my childhood, her library nameplate, her favorite coffee mug, old handwritten note cards, reading glasses, bookmarks she'd collected over the years. I picked up one of the note cards and smiled. For just a second, it felt like she was standing beside me again. Then Denise appeared. Without asking, she grabbed the box out of my hands. "We don't have time for this today," I blinked. "Those are Mom's things." Before I could reach for the box again, my father spoke from across the room. "Miranda," he sighed, "please don't start today. Not, let's talk about it. Not, is your mother's daughter. Just, don't start." I quietly placed the box beside the attic ladder. It was easier than arguing. It had always been easier than arguing. While everyone else kept working, I wandered into the kitchen for a bottle of water. That's when I saw it. Denise's phone lit up on the counter. The screen was facing upward. Normally I wouldn't have looked, but one word caught my eye. Active. Curious. I stepped closer. My heart immediately started pounding. It wasn't an email. It wasn't a text message. It was a real estate listing. Our address sat across the top of the page. Beneath it were photographs of the exact rooms Denise had been taking pictures of only minutes earlier. The price was already listed. Near the bottom, 2 words appeared in bold letters. Offer pending. I couldn't breathe. Offer pending. That meant someone had already agreed to buy the house. No discussion, no family meeting, no signature from me, nothing. The decision had already been made. Suddenly, every strange conversation from the past week made perfect sense. The business card, the whispered phone call, the staged photographs, the empty rooms. They hadn't been preparing to move. They'd been preparing to sell my mother's house behind my back. I grabbed my phone intending to take a picture of the listing. Before I could, someone called my name from upstairs. "Miranda." It was Cole. His voice sounded nervous. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and hurried toward the hallway. The pull-down attic ladder was already open. Boxes lined both sides of the hallway. Dad was carrying furniture toward the garage. Denise was still somewhere behind me. Cole stood near the top of the ladder looking down. He wasn't supposed to be up there. "Careful!" I shouted. He grinned. "I'm fine." Those were the last calm words anyone spoke that day. Everything happened so quickly my brain still replays it in slow motion. Cole shifted his weight. One of the old wooden ladder hinges snapped. The ladder jerked violently. His feet disappeared. For one frozen heartbeat, he wasn't standing anymore. He was falling. I didn't think. I didn't plan. My body moved before my mind did. I lunged forward with both arms stretched out. If I missed, he would hit the hardwood floor head first. And I couldn't let that happen. Not to him. Not ever. I caught Cole before he hit the floor, but the attic ladder wasn't finished falling. One violent swing later, something slammed into the side of my head. The next thing I remember, I was lying in my own blood, while the first lie of my life was already being spoken out loud. People always ask me what hurt the most that day. The 14 stitches, the concussion, losing my family. No. The worst part happened before I even hit the floor. It happened the exact moment one person decided to tell a lie, and everyone else decided it was easier to believe her than ask me what really happened. The instant Cole started falling, instinct took over. I threw myself toward the ladder without thinking. My left hand grabbed the front of his shirt. My right arm wrapped around his shoulder. For one terrifying second, all of his weight landed against me. The broken ladder kept swinging. I managed to pull him away from the open space just before he could slam headfirst onto the hardwood floor. Instead, he crashed against the lower rungs. His leg scraped hard across the edge of the ladder. I heard him scream. At almost the exact same moment, something heavy came flying toward me. So I never actually saw what hit me. Maybe it was the ladder. Maybe it was one of the heavy storage boxes. Maybe both. Whatever it was, it smashed into the side of my head with incredible force. Everything exploded into white. For a few seconds, I couldn't hear anything except a loud ringing inside my ears. The room spun around me. Warm liquid started running down the side of my face. At first, I honestly thought someone had spilled water. Then drops began hitting the hardwood floor. Blood. A lot of blood. Head wounds bleed more than people realize. I reached toward my temple. My fingers came away completely red. The cut felt deep. Really deep. I tried sitting up. Cole was still beside me. He was crying, holding his shin. A thin cut stretched across his leg where the ladder had scraped him. Nothing about it looked like he'd been thrown. It looked exactly like someone sliding down broken wooden steps. Even through my dizziness, I noticed that detail. At the time, I didn't know why my brain held on to it. Later, that tiny detail would become incredibly important. Then Denise came running around the corner. She saw blood. She saw Cole crying. She saw my hand still resting on his shoulder after I'd caught him. She looked at the scene for less than 2 seconds, and somehow she already knew exactly what story she wanted to tell. She didn't kneel beside either of us. She didn't ask if we were okay. She didn't check my head wound. Instead, she screamed, "You pushed him." Her voice echoed through the entire house. "You pushed my son!" I stared at her, completely stunned. "What? You pushed him off the ladder!" I honestly thought she'd lost her mind. "No." I tried standing. The room tilted sideways. I caught him. She wasn't listening. She had already chosen her version. Dad came running into the hallway. He looked from Cole to me to the blood covering the floor. His eyes stopped on Denise. "What happened?" She answered before anyone else could speak. "She pulled him off the ladder." "I didn't!" I shouted. "I saved! Look at him!" Denise interrupted. "Look what she did!" Cole was crying too hard to speak. He wasn't accusing me. He wasn't defending me. He was simply scared. He looked back and forth between his mother and me, frozen, confused. Only 14 years old. Children don't always know what to say when adults begin rewriting reality around them. Dad looked at Cole. Then at Denise. Then finally, at me. I waited. Surely he'd ask. "Miranda, what happened?" One question. That's all I needed. Just one. Instead, he sighed. Not angrily. Almost. Tired. Like this situation had become inconvenient. His shoulders dropped. His face changed. I watched the exact moment he stopped looking for the truth and started looking for the easiest explanation. That moment still visits me in my dreams. Someone called an ambulance. I don't remember who. Neighbors started gathering outside. Paramedics arrived within minutes. One of them gently moved my hand away from my head. "Oh," he whispered, "that's deep." Another paramedic examined Cole's leg. Minor laceration. Then they looked at me again. "We need to get her to the hospital now." Blood kept dripping onto the stretcher while they loaded me inside. As the ambulance doors closed, I looked back one last time. Dad wasn't watching me. He was comforting Denise. She was crying. Real tears, or very convincing ones. Either way, they worked. The ride to the hospital felt endless. The sirens screamed above us. One paramedic kept asking simple questions. "Do you know your name? What day is it? Are you feeling sleepy?" I answered as best I could. Everything sounded distant, like I was underwater. Before we reached the emergency room, the paramedic quietly said something I'll never forget. "You probably saved that boy's life." I closed my eyes. Those were the first kind words anyone had spoken since the accident. They also turned out to be the last kind words I'd hear from someone who believed me for a very long time. At the hospital, I thought my father would finally ask me what really happened. Instead, he walked into my room, looked at the 14 stitches in my head, and made a decision that destroyed our family forever. You know what's worse than being falsely accused? Being given every chance to tell the truth, and watching your own father choose not to hear it. He stood only a few feet away from my hospital bed. One simple question could have changed everything. He never asked it. By the time the ambulance reached the emergency room, blood had soaked through the towel the paramedics were pressing against my head. Bright white lights filled the hallway. Doctors and nurses surrounded me before I could even sit up. Someone cut away the blood-soaked bandage. Another nurse checked my eyes with a flashlight. The emergency physician leaned over me and said quietly, "We're gonna need stitches, quite a few." I nodded. Talking made my head pound. Every heartbeat felt like someone was striking the inside of my skull with a hammer. They cleaned the wound first. I won't pretend it didn't hurt. Even with the numbing injections, I could feel every movement. The doctor worked carefully, one stitch, then another, then another. I eventually stopped counting. When he finally finished, he stepped back and removed his gloves. 14 stitches. Then he looked directly at me. "You also have a mild concussion." He explained that I'd need observation for at least a few days because head injuries could become dangerous without warning. I simply nodded. My body hurt, but my heart still believed something important. Dad would come. He'd listen, he'd ask. Everything would be okay. I still believed that. About an hour later, I heard familiar voices outside my room. Dad, Denise, Cole. Relief washed over me. Finally, we were going to talk. The door slowly opened. Dad stepped inside alone. For just 1 second, I saw the father I'd spent my whole life loving. He looked tired, confused, almost guilty. He stood beside my bed without speaking. I looked up at him. "Dad." My voice barely came out above a whisper. The latter, I never got to finish. Before I could explain, Denise called his name from somewhere down the hallway. Not loudly, not urgently. Just, "David?" He turned his head toward the hallway, then back toward me. For one brief second, I honestly believed he was choosing between us. His daughter, or the woman accusing her. He made his choice. Without asking a single question, he turned around and walked back out. The door quietly closed behind him. I stared at it for several seconds, waiting. Surely he'd come back. Surely he'd realize he hadn't even heard my side. He never did. Later that afternoon, Joy heard Denise speaking to one of the nurses. She wasn't crying anymore. Her voice sounded calm, controlled, almost rehearsed. She told the nurse I'd always had a temper, that I'd been jealous of Cole for years, that I'd finally lost control. Every sentence sounded carefully prepared. Every lie fit neatly beside the next one. I lay there listening through the partially open door, unable to defend myself. The nurse didn't argue. Why would she? She didn't know me. An older nurse eventually came into my room to check my bandages. She gently adjusted the dressing near my hairline. Then she smiled. "You've been through a lot today." That tiny bit of kindness nearly broke me. I hadn't cried when I hit my head. I hadn't cried during the stitches. I almost cried because one stranger treated me with more compassion than my own family had. A little later, Denise came into my room alone. She quietly closed the door behind her. There were no tears now, no shaking voice, no frightened mother. She folded her hands together and smiled. "This didn't have to happen, Miranda." I stared at her. "What are you talking about?" She tilted her head. "You always involve yourself in everything." Then she glanced toward my bandages. For the smallest moment, I saw satisfaction on her face. Not concern, not regret, satisfaction, as if everything was unfolding exactly the way she'd hoped. Then she walked out. She never asked how I was feeling. She never apologized. She simply came to see the damage. That evening, Dad returned one final time. This time he carried paperwork the hospital staff had given him. Admission forms, insurance forms, emergency contact information. He stood beside my bed silently flipping through the pages. Then he stopped. One line had his name written on it. Emergency contact. For years, that line had always been filled with his information. Without saying anything, he handed the clipboard back to the nurse. "Remove my name." The nurse looked surprised. "Sir?" I said remove it. She hesitated, then drew one single line through his name. I watched the ink slowly cross it out. Something inside me cracked. Not loudly, quietly, like old glass. Dad picked up the clipboard, looked directly into my eyes, and said the 5 words that ended 30 years of being his daughter. "You're not my daughter anymore." No shouting, no anger, just cold certainty. Then he turned around, walked toward the hallway, and never looked back. As they left, I noticed something. Cole stopped walking, just outside my room, only for half a second. He looked back at me. Our eyes met. There was fear on his face, confusion, and something else. Guilt. Then Denise gently placed her hand on his shoulder and guided him away. The hallway became silent. I didn't call after them. I didn't beg. I simply stared at the ceiling and started making a list. Not a list of people I'd lost, a list of everything I'd now have to survive alone. That list became the first decision I'd made entirely for myself. 3 days later, no one from my family came to take me home. But one text message, from someone I never expected, proved that the truth had been alive all along, and it would become the first crack in Denise's perfect lie. 3 days after my father abandoned me in the hospital, I walked out with 14 stitches, a concussion, and no family. I thought I'd lost everything. Then my phone buzzed. It was only 2 words, but those 2 words proved someone inside that house still knew the truth. When the hospital finally discharged me, I sat on the edge of the bed waiting for someone to arrive. Every few minutes I'd glance toward the hallway. Maybe Dad would come. Maybe he'd realized he'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe he'd at least drive me home. Hours passed. No one came. And finally, a nurse walked in holding my discharge papers. "Is your ride here yet?" I smiled politely. "She'll be here soon." I didn't have the heart to tell her the truth. The person waiting outside wasn't family anymore. It was my friend, Dana. Dana Whitmore worked the school bus route next to mine. She wasn't the kind of friend who made dramatic speeches or asked endless questions. She simply showed up. When the automatic hospital doors opened, I saw her old silver sedan parked near the entrance. The moment she spotted me, she jumped out and hurried over. She looked at the bandage wrapped around my head, then at the bruises spreading across my face. For several seconds, she didn't say anything. Finally, she quietly opened the passenger door. "You don't have to explain today." I climbed inside. That sentence probably saved me from breaking apart. The drive back to Columbus took almost 45 minutes. Dana never forced conversation. She turned the radio down, handed me a bottle of water, and simply drove. Sometimes silence is the greatest kindness another person can offer. When we reached my apartment, she carried my overnight bag upstairs without being asked. She made tea, left pain medication on the kitchen counter, wrote her phone number on a sticky note, even though I already had it. Then she smiled. "If you need anything," she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. For the first time in days, someone made me feel safe. That evening I sat alone in my apartment looking at the folder the hospital had given me. Inside were discharge papers, CT scan reports, doctor's notes, photographs of my injury, everything documenting exactly what had happened to me. Without really knowing why, I bought another folder. Then I carefully made copies of every document, every medical report, every prescription, every receipt, every piece of paper. Something deep inside me kept whispering, "Keep everything." I listened. The next morning I changed every shared password my father still knew. Streaming accounts, online banking, cloud storage, emergency contacts, one by one. I quietly removed him from every place where my life still overlapped with his. Not because I wanted revenge, because I finally understood something. The man who crossed his own name off my hospital paperwork had already decided I no longer belonged to him. I simply finished the paperwork he had started. Then I updated something I never thought I'd change, my emergency contact. For 12 years, it had been my father. Now it became Dana. When the office assistant asked, "Relationship?" I hesitated, then answered, "Friend." It felt strange saying it out loud, but somehow it also felt right. That afternoon my phone buzzed, unknown number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I opened the message. It simply read, "I'm sorry," no name, no explanation, nothing else. For several seconds I stared at those 2 words. Then I realized who it was. Cole. Before I could reply, the message disappeared. He'd unsent it. I quickly took a screenshot. Not because I planned to use it, because something told me one day it might matter. A frightened 14-year-old had tried to tell me something before someone convinced him not to. That meant one very important thing. The truth was still alive. Monday morning brought another surprise. My phone rang again. This time it was my supervisor. Her voice sounded unusually careful. "Miranda, I'm afraid we have to place you on administrative leave." I frowned. "What?" "There has been a report involving a minor." The room suddenly fell cold. "A report?" She paused. "I can't discuss details over the phone. But until the investigation is complete, you won't be driving your school bus." After the call ended, I simply sat there. The accusation hadn't stopped at the hospital. Someone wanted to destroy my career too. There was only one person organized enough, calculating enough, and angry enough to know exactly which phone call would hurt me most. It wasn't Dad. It wasn't Cole. It was Denise. And suddenly, I realized something terrifying. If she was willing to take away my job, what else had she already taken while I was lying unconscious in that hospital bed? That evening, I couldn't stop thinking about the real estate listing I'd seen on Denise's phone. I opened my laptop, typed in my mother's address, waited. The page loaded. My stomach dropped. The listing no longer said, offer pending. It now said, sold. And directly underneath, I saw the closing date. I read it once, then again, then a third time. It had officially closed while I was still lying in the hospital with 14 stitches in my head. While I was unconscious, they hadn't just abandoned me. They'd sold my mother's house. The next morning I drove back to Springfield, parked across the street from the only home my mother ever asked me to protect, and discovered someone else was already living inside it. That's when I finally understood. The latter had never been the beginning of their plan. It was only the perfect excuse. I thought losing my father was the worst thing that could happen. I was wrong, because when I drove back to my childhood home 4 days later, I realized I hadn't just lost my family. I'd already lost the house my mother begged me to protect, and they'd sold it while I was lying unconscious in a hospital bed. The next morning, I left Columbus before sunrise. The 45-mile drive to Springfield felt longer than it ever had before. Every mile carried another memory. The gas station where Mom used to buy me hot chocolate during winter. The little diner where Dad and I ate pancakes after my school concerts. The park where I taught Cole how to ride his bicycle. Places that had once felt like home now felt like evidence from another person's life. I kept asking myself the same question. How long had they been planning this? The business card, the whispered phone call, the staged photographs. None of it had happened by accident. The latter hadn't started anything. It had simply made their plan easier. When I turned onto our street, I almost drove past the house. It didn't look like ours anymore. The flower beds my mother had planted were gone. The curtains had been taken down. The porch swing Dad built when I was 10 had disappeared. Then I saw it. A large white sign planted directly in the front yard. Sold. The word felt like someone had punched me in the chest. I pulled my car to the opposite side of the street and turned off the engine. For several minutes, I couldn't move. I just stared. This was the same front porch where Mom kissed my forehead before my first day of middle school. The same front window where she'd wave every afternoon when my school bus pulled up. The same reading nook where she'd spend hundreds of evenings surrounded by books. Now, it belonged to strangers. I wasn't even allowed to walk inside. Legally, I had become a visitor in the only place that had ever truly felt like home. While I sat there, the front door opened. A woman I'd never seen before stepped outside carrying a cardboard box. She looked around the yard before noticing my car parked across the street. For a second, our eyes met. She smiled politely. The kind of smile you give a stranger. Then she disappeared back inside. She had no idea she was standing inside my childhood. She wasn't the villain. She'd simply bought a house. The people who sold it were the ones who destroyed a family. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel. For the first time since the accident, I cried. Not because of the stitches. Not because of Dad. Because I'd failed the one promise I'd made my mother. Keep the house. I promised. And now it was gone. After a while, I started the car again. There was only one place left to go, my Aunt Rosemary's house. She was my mother's younger sister. A retired schoolteacher. The only person in our family who had never been intimidated by Denise. When I pulled into her driveway, she opened the front door before I even reached the porch. She looked at the bandage wrapped around my head. Then she hugged me. She didn't ask questions. She didn't demand explanations. She simply held me until I stopped shaking. When we finally sat down in her living room, she quietly disappeared into another room. A minute later, she returned carrying an old cell phone. It looked ancient, the kind with scratches across the screen. She carefully placed it on the coffee table between us. I've been waiting 18 years to give you this. I looked at her, confused. What is it? She smiled sadly. It's your mother's voicemail. My heart stopped. Rosemary pressed play. Static filled the room for a second. Then, I heard my mother's voice. Not from memory. Not inside my head. Actually heard her voice. For the first time since I was 12, tears immediately blurred my vision. Miranda, she said softly, if you're listening to this, it means I'm already gone. I covered my mouth with both hands. Her voice sounded exactly the same. Warm, gentle, safe. Near the end of the recording, she said something that completely changed everything I believed about the house. Please keep the house, sweetheart. It's the last thing I can leave you. Keep this family together. When the recording ended, the room remained completely silent. Rosemary looked at me. Your father heard that voicemail. I slowly looked up. What? I played it for him after your mother's funeral. I felt the air leave my lungs. He knew? She nodded. He knew exactly what Ellen wanted. That one sentence changed everything. Until that moment, I'd believed Dad had simply been weak. Now I understood something much worse. He hadn't sold the house because he didn't know my mother's wishes. He sold it, knowing exactly what she wanted. That night, after I returned home, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Cole. This one wasn't deleted. It simply said, "She told me what to say." A few seconds later, another message started appearing. 3 little typing dots. I waited. They disappeared. Nothing else came. I stared at those unfinished words for a long time. He didn't need to finish the sentence. He'd already told me everything. Denise hadn't misunderstood the accident. She had created the story. And someone inside that house was finally too scared to keep carrying her lie. The next morning, my Aunt Rosemary made one quiet phone call to the mother of the only other person who had witnessed the accident, a 15-year-old boy named Trevor. Neither Denise nor my father had any idea. Their entire story was about to collapse because of one teenager and one forgotten text message. The funny thing about lies is that they usually depend on one assumption, that everyone who saw the truth will stay quiet. Denise believed that. My father believed that. They never imagined a 15-year-old boy would become the one person brave enough to destroy everything they'd built. The morning after I listened to my mother's voicemail, Aunt Rosemary called me before I even finished my coffee. "Miranda," she said calmly, "I think I know who can tell us what really happened." I already knew the answer before she said his name. Trevor. Cole's friend. The boy who had been helping us carry boxes the day of the accident. The only person besides my family who had seen everything happen with his own eyes. Rosemary had known Trevor's mother, Nora, for years through church. She wasn't calling to convince anyone. She simply wanted to ask one question. Was your son there? That single question would change everything. Later that afternoon, Rosemary called back. Her voice sounded different, not excited, certain. Nora talked to Trevor. I held my breath. And? He told her everything. For the first time since the accident, I felt hope. Real hope. Trevor didn't hesitate. According to Nora, the moment she asked what happened, he answered without thinking. Miranda didn't push Cole. She saved him. He explained exactly what he'd seen. Cole had been climbing down the old attic ladder. One hinge suddenly snapped. The ladder swung sideways. Cole lost his balance. Before he could hit the floor, I lunged forward, caught him, pulled him against me. Then the ladder swung back and smashed into my head, exactly as I remembered it, exactly as it had happened. Nora listened quietly. Then she asked another question. Did anyone tell you something different afterward? Trevor nodded. He admitted he'd been scared. Not because of the accident. Because of Denise. He said she'd started telling everyone that I'd pushed Cole almost immediately, even while the ambulance was still outside. He remembered thinking it sounded strange, because he'd watched the whole thing. He knew she wasn't telling the truth. Then Nora asked something none of us expected. Did Cole ever say anything? Trevor reached for his phone, opened an old group chat with 3 school friends, scrolled upward, stopped, then handed the phone to his mother. There, sent only hours after the accident, before adults had time to rewrite the story, was one simple message from Cole. I totally ate it off the ladder, lol. Nora stared at the screen. Those 7 casual words carried more truth than every accusation Denise had made. Kids don't think about legal consequences, they simply describe what happened. Cole hadn't said, Miranda pushed me. He hadn't said, my sister attacked me. He'd written exactly what had happened. He fell. That evening, Denise called the Callahan house herself. She already knew relatives were beginning to ask questions. She wanted Trevor to support her version. Instead, she got the biggest surprise of her life. Trevor calmly repeated the truth. Miranda caught him. The ladder hit her. She didn't do anything wrong. There was a long silence. Then Denise laughed. Not because something was funny, because people sometimes laugh when panic first arrives. Oh, sweetheart, I think you're confused. Trevor didn't answer. He simply turned his phone around, showing Cole's own message. I totally ate it off the ladder, lol. Another silence. Longer this time. Finally Denise whispered, he's confused. She repeated it, again, almost desperately. He's just confused. But repeating a lie doesn't make it stronger. Sometimes it only tells everyone you're running out of truth. For the first time, my father's world began falling apart. He'd spent an entire week believing I'd attacked my brother. Now, a 15-year-old stranger and his own son's text message were telling exactly the same story. He didn't argue. He didn't defend Denise. He simply walked outside, got into his truck, and sat there alone for almost half an hour. According to Rosemary, he never started the engine. He just stared through the windshield, thinking, maybe replaying that Saturday over and over again. Maybe remembering all the times I protected Cole. Maybe remembering every moment I'd quietly carried our family. For the first time, he was forced to ask himself a question he should have asked in the hospital. What if Miranda was telling the truth? The answer came far too late. That night, my phone stayed completely silent. No apology, no explanation, no call. But I wasn't expecting one anymore. Something inside me had changed. A week earlier, I would have been desperately waiting for my father to believe me. Now, I simply wanted the truth to exist. Whether he accepted it or not was no longer my responsibility. The following afternoon, Aunt Rosemary called again. The fear he'd been carrying all week finally eased. Children don't need perfection. They need someone who believes them. I refused to make him pay for mistakes that belong to adults. Then I looked back at my father. You know what hurts the most? He finally raised his eyes. I never needed Trevor. I never needed proof. I just needed my father to ask me what happened. The porch became completely silent. Even Denise stopped talking. Because there was no defense for that. My father whispered, I made a mistake. I slowly shook my head. No, a mistake is forgetting a birthday. A mistake is taking the wrong highway. You looked at your bleeding daughter and chose the easiest story instead of the true one. That wasn't a mistake. That was a decision. Every word landed harder than the one before, because every word was true. I rested my hand on the edge of the door, not to slam it. Just to remind myself, this time I was the one deciding who stayed. Then I told them something that left every one of them speechless. I wasn't angry about the accident anymore. I was angry about what they'd done while I was lying unconscious, because I'd finally discovered exactly when they planned to steal my mother's house. They thought the biggest mistake they'd made was believing Denise's lie. It wasn't. Their biggest mistake happened 3 days before the accident, when they signed papers they prayed I'd never see. And thanks to one forgotten email, I finally knew exactly when they decided to erase my mother forever. I looked at my father standing on my porch. He looked older than he had only a week earlier. The confidence he'd carried into the hospital had completely disappeared. For the first time in my life, he looked like a man who finally understood the cost of one terrible decision. But I wasn't finished, not yet. There was something I couldn't understand, I said quietly. While I was in the hospital, you sold Mom's house. Dad slowly nodded. His eyes never left the floor. I know. No, I interrupted. You don't? I've been asking myself one question all week. Why were boxes already packed before the accident? Why was Denise taking pictures of every room? Why did I see the real estate listing before Cole fell? Neither of them answered. I reached inside my apartment and picked up my laptop. A few clicks later, I turned the screen toward them. I requested the public property records yesterday. Dad frowned. Denise's face immediately changed. She recognized what was on the screen before anyone else did. The record showed every important date. The listing date, the accepted offer, the inspection, the closing paperwork. Every single document had already been prepared before the accident ever happened. The latter hadn't delayed the sale. It had simply removed the one person who might have stopped it. Then I opened another document. This one came from my email. Months earlier, Dad had accidentally forwarded me paperwork meant for Denise. I'd never paid attention to it at the time, now I had. Across the top, one sentence caught my eye. Seller agrees to vacant possession immediately following closing. Immediately. Not after discussing it with me. Not after honoring Mom's wishes. Immediately. They'd already promised buyers the house would be empty. Long before anyone was injured. Long before anyone accused me of anything. I looked directly at Denise. The accident wasn't your plan. But once it happened, you realized something. If I became the villain, no one would question why I wasn't involved. Her smile disappeared. For the first time, I saw panic. Real panic. She shook her head. That's ridiculous. You're imagining things. I calmly closed the laptop. Maybe. But explain something. If you believed I attacked Cole, why did you still finish selling the house while I was unconscious? Silence. Complete silence. Dad slowly turned toward Denise. His expression changed. What does she mean? Denise answered too quickly. We had deadlines. The buyers, Dad interrupted her. You told me we had no choice. She froze. He stared at her. Then something incredible happened. For the first time since he'd married her, he started asking questions. Real questions, the kind he'd never asked me. When did you know the buyers were ready? No answer. When did you sign the paperwork? Still nothing. Why didn't you wait until Miranda came home? Denise's breathing became faster. Finally she whispered, I was trying to protect this family. Dad looked at her in disbelief. Protect us from what? She didn't answer. Because there wasn't an answer. There never had been. Cole quietly stepped beside me. He looked at his father. Dad, I told Mom Miranda saved me. I told her before the ambulance left. The entire parking lot became silent. Dad slowly looked toward Denise. You knew? Cole nodded. I told her. I said Miranda caught me. I told her twice. My father closed his eyes for several seconds. He couldn't speak. Everything he believed for the past week collapsed in that one moment. Not because of Trevor. Not because of paperwork. Because his own son had been telling the truth from the very beginning. Then Dad whispered something I'll never forget. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to himself. I never even asked my daughter. The words broke halfway through the sentence. He covered his face with both hands. A man who had spent his whole life believing he was protecting his family finally realized he had become the person who destroyed it. Denise suddenly stepped backward. She looked from Dad to Cole to me. Then she quietly said, I think I should go. No one stopped her. She walked to the truck, opened the passenger door, sat inside. For the first time she had nothing left to say. Because lies survive on confidence. The moment confidence disappears, so do the lies. Dad remained standing outside my apartment. Neither of us spoke. Nearly 2 full minutes passed. Finally, he looked at me. Tears filled his eyes. Miranda, I don't deserve another chance. No, I answered softly, you don't. But this isn't about what you deserve anymore. It's about what I deserve. He slowly nodded. For the first time, he understood. The next morning, my father called me one last time. Not to ask for forgiveness. Not to ask for another chance. He called because he'd found something hidden inside my mother's old desk. A handwritten letter. Addressed only to me. And after reading the first sentence, I finally understood why my mother had been so afraid to leave us behind. My mother had been gone for 18 years. I thought she'd already said her final goodbye. I was wrong. Because hidden inside an old wooden desk was one handwritten letter that she prayed I would never have to read. And after the very first sentence, I finally understood why she'd been so desperate for me to keep the house. The next morning, my phone rang just after 9. It was my father. For a long moment I simply watched the screen. A week ago I would have answered before the second ring. Now I wasn't sure I wanted to hear his voice again. Eventually I picked up. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally he quietly said, Miranda, I found something. His voice sounded completely different. No anger, no excuses, just exhaustion. I was cleaning out the garage this morning. I found your mother's old writing desk. The buyers left it behind because one drawer was jammed. He paused. I forced it open. There was an envelope inside. My heart immediately began racing. What kind of envelope? It has your name on it. And only your name. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Mom had always written letters, birthday letters, Christmas letters, little notes hidden inside library books. But this felt different. Dad continued. I haven't opened it. It wasn't meant for me. I think. It belongs to you. An hour later, he arrived alone. No Denise, no excuses, no speeches, just my father, holding a yellow envelope that had aged almost 2 decades. The edges were slightly worn. Across the front, written in my mother's familiar blue handwriting, were 3 simple words. For Miranda only. The moment I saw her handwriting, my knees almost gave out. I hadn't seen it since I was 12 years old. Dad handed me the envelope. His hands were shaking. I don't deserve to read it. I quietly nodded. No, you don't. For the first time, he didn't argue. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a folded letter. The paper had yellowed with age, but the ink remained perfectly clear. I unfolded it slowly, then I began reading. My beautiful Miranda, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to protect you. The tears came instantly. I wiped them away and kept reading. I know your father loves you, but I also know something he doesn't yet understand. He loves with his heart, but sometimes he follows other people's voices instead of his own. I stopped reading, looked at Dad. He was already crying. I continued. One day, someone may ask him to choose between what is easy and what is right. If that day ever comes, please remember his choice is not a reflection of your worth. I couldn't read for several seconds. Every word felt like she'd somehow seen the future. The next paragraph explained everything. I asked him to keep this house because it was never about bricks or walls. It was about keeping you safe. Home isn't a building. Home is the place where someone believes you, even when the whole world doesn't. The room became completely silent. I slowly lowered the letter. The house had never been the real promise. I'd misunderstood my mother all these years. She wasn't asking me to protect a building. She was asking my father to protect me. Dad buried his face in his hands. "Oh God," he whispered. "Oh God." For several minutes he couldn't stop crying. I failed her. Then he looked at me. "No, I failed both of you." I folded the letter carefully, placed it back inside the envelope. Then I looked at my father. "You know what hurts the most?" He slowly nodded. "I think I do." I shook my head. "No, you still don't. Hardest part wasn't losing the house. It wasn't the stitches. It wasn't even hearing you say I wasn't your daughter." I took one deep breath. The hardest part was realizing Mom understood 18 years ago that one day, you might not believe me, he completely broke. For the first time in my life, I saw my father crying not because life had hurt him, but because he'd finally seen the damage his own choices had caused. After a long silence, he quietly stood up. "I can't change what I did." "No, you can't." "Ah, but I can spend the rest of my life accepting the consequences." I nodded. "That's the first honest thing you've said." He gave me one final look, not asking for forgiveness, not expecting another chance, just accepting the truth. Then he walked toward the door. Before leaving, he stopped. Without turning around, he softly said, "I'll always be your father, even if I no longer deserve to be." Then he walked away. I stood by the window watching his truck disappear down the street. In my hands was my mother's final letter, the one thing no one had been able to steal. Not Denise, not the buyers, not even time itself. That afternoon, I bought a simple wooden frame and placed the letter inside. Not because it reminded me of everything I'd lost, but because it reminded me of something much more important. My mother never asked me to spend my life saving a house. She wanted me to protect the one thing no one else ever had, myself. People still ask if I ever forgave my father. The truth is, forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. I forgave him because I refused to carry that pain forever. But some broken doors are never meant to be reopened. The house is gone. The past is gone. Even the family I once knew is gone. But every morning when I walk past my mother's framed letter, I remember one sentence that changed my life forever. Home is the place where someone believes you even when the whole world doesn't. After searching for home my entire life, I finally realized I had carried it inside me all along. The end.